Hey everyone, in this Java tutorial, I will be teaching you on how to use the grid bag layout for your JPanel. So that means that you'll be able to make a custom made layout for your program. So far, we have these 5 buttons that appear horizontally of the screen. But we want to tell Java that we want to move these buttons to different positions. So basically, this window is like a graph. Horizontally of this window is considered as the x-axis. Vertically of this window is considered as the y-axis. So that means that this button 1 is at a position of 0, 0, meaning x equals 0 and y equals 0. In the next one, the coordinates of this button 2 would be 1, 0, meaning x is 1 and y is 0, etc. If there's a button underneath this button 1, then its position would be 0, 1, meaning x equals 0 and y equals 1, etc. and so on. So this is my code of the 5 buttons. I've imported the libraries. I extended the JPanel, so that means that you don't have to have the JPanel object. I've created the 5 variables from this object so I can make the 5 buttons like I did in this constructor, and I added the buttons onto the JPanel one at a time. And this is my window that I've made, and I added the JPanel onto the frame. So if you got everything, then we're ready to go. So yeah, in order to use the grid bag layout, you have to type in set layout, open and close parentheses, and semicolon. Inside of this parentheses, type in new grid bag constraints, or not constraints but layout. So type this in and make sure that you import the GridBagLayout library. And now we have to make the GridBagConstraints object, because this object right here calls for that object. So type in GridBagConstraints, GBC, or make your own variable. Doesn't have to be the same. New grid bag constraints. So yeah, and make sure that you import the library for the grid bag constraints. And yeah, this object calls for this object, so this this will get the information of the coordinates of each buttons. So I'll be using this variable underneath the line of the creation of the button. So GBC equals new, or not equals, GBC dot grid x equals 0. So this is the x position, and the position is 0, x, y's. And now let's make the GBC again, and grid y equals 0 as well. So the coordinate is 0, 0. And we have to apply that GBC to the addition of the first button onto the JPanel. So, and we use the GBC, the position, so Java will know that we're telling it to apply this position onto this button. So we have to do the same thing for each um, buttons. So GBC, GBC, and GBC, and GBC. So yeah, if we don't overwrite this grid X and Y, then all the buttons would be positioned at 0, 0. But we don't want that, so we have to override it by using the same grid X and Y's. I'll change the numbers after I'm done copy and pasting. So yeah, I want my buttons to align diagonally. So I'll do 1 and 1, 2 and 2, 3 and 3, 4 and 4. The reason why this the 4 doesn't affect this one right here, the first button, is because that we've used grid X and Y to 0 and we apply it onto the J panel before we even overwrite the new value. So that's why each buttons have their unique positions. So now let's run it and see what happens. Now we have a button, or we have the buttons aligned diagonally. So that's pretty good. So now let me reposition this button 5 underneath the button 2. And I want to stretch this button 5 across to button 4. So yeah, 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. Let me reposition it at 1 and keep it the same at the Y. So memorize this next one. So GBC dot grid width equals, let's do 3. This right here means that this button will take up 3 spaces on the x-axis. So yeah, now we have this button 5 in the middle, and I set this as 1, but then the button is right here because I set the width of 3. So this button is taking up these 3 spaces. So this space, and this space. So let's stretch it out now. So GBC dot fill equals grid bag constraints dot horizontal, meaning that you're stretching the button horizontally. So now let's see what it looks like. Now we have a stretched out button horizontally. Now let's stretch this button 1 vertically down right here. So it should be simple. So for this button 1, we type in GBC dot grid height equals 4. And we have to type in grid height for every buttons. So each one can be stretching down to 4, and we do not want that. So we only want this button to be able to do that, not all buttons. So we have to override it to say that we only want to stretch only one grid. And that's the default, by the way. 1, 1, 1 here. And yeah, you don't have to type in grid width for every one. because this is the last button. And yeah, so GBC grid height is 4. And yeah, let's see what it looks like. Now we see our button 1 appear here, and it's taking up 4 grid spaces, not horizontally, but vertically. Now let's stretch it out. So GBC dot fill equals grid bag constraints vertical. And now let's see what it looks like. Looks good. Forgot one more. Let's do 5, I guess. The 5. Now we have a good looking button right here that met with button 5. Button 1, button 5, diagonal buttons right here. Yeah, it's pretty cool. Now there's one more thing to do, which is the insets. Basically, what it does is that it spreads the buttons away from each other. So it's kind of like padding. So type in gbc.insets equals new insets. Make sure that your I is capitalized, or else it won't work at all. And make sure that you imported the insets library. Once you're done with that, then we have to make 5, not 5, 4 parameters for this insets object. So let's do 5, 5, 5, 5. The first one is the spacing to the top. The second one is the spacing to the left. The third one is the spacing to the bottom. And the last one is the spacing to the right. So 5, 5, 5, 5, 5. Okay. Now we should have buttons spread apart from each other, away from each other. So yes, space here, space, space, space. So yes, this concludes my tutorial over how to use the grid bag layout. Thanks for watching and stay tuned for my next tutorial.